You're listening to Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. Small town feel with big time ideas. After all, you are entitled to Brad's opinion. Here's your host, Brad Allard.
Well, good morning. Welcome to the last show of 2024. Taylor, this isn't your last show, though, don't you have others?
I got one more after you.
That's good. So you get the Biz Life.
The Biz Live podcast with Dottie Bador.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah. His guest today is from New Zealand.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a guest today. I've got guests most of January, so I like to book up in advance. But today I had it in my mind, I was going to talk about all the things I could do without in 2025. And I, kind of joked on the Facebook page about, being my version of Festivus, the airing of grievances and whatnot. But, yesterday, Jimmy Carter passed away, as almost all of y'all should know. And I thought, okay, this would be a good time to do a little reflection basically on my thoughts about Mr. Carter from, and the thing about it is I'm older than a good number of y'all that are listening or watching. And I can remember, in real time what was going on with Mr. Carter's presidency. And so some thoughts about that and what the world is saying and things of that. And I'm going to compare him to our current president who, well, I'll just save the comments for that. And I think it's quite the contrast, because one thing I can do without is all the lies that were basically told to us about Mr. Biden over the last year. And I'm going to be addressing that specifically. So anyway, let's talk about the sponsors before we get too far away from it. Thank you, Otto, at our place. I'll be there Thursday, as usual, with the problem-solving crew. I see the kids are running around out there or something. A little noise out in the hallway, but that's great. Anyway, back to Otto's place, our place. It's a great place. I was there last week doing business, which is a place I like to do business there, that and Gina's, because it's an unobtrusive atmosphere. It's quiet. It's the staff is really, really good about not bugging you all the time and whatnot, and just kind of just letting you take care of your own business. And so it's a great place. And both Otto's and Gina's provide the same quality service and the same quality food, and it's a great place to go do all your business. Now, I am not sure. I haven't been able to get a hold of Otto because he's very busy this time of year. I am not sure about their hours tomorrow on New Year's Eve. I know they're closed today, and there you go. But as far as tomorrow, you need to just maybe call and find out what the plan is for New Year's Eve. Also, same thing with Wild Cigar. The Wild Cigar is... I asked him, Nathan, I was there last week, and I was asking him about, do you have any special plans for 4th of July? What am I talking about? Getting old, for the New Year's Eve. And they had their usual specials going on. As far as are they going to stay up to 2 or anything like that? Not really. But Wild Cigar is a good place to go. You can check out some of the ball games, particularly at 2:30, the Great Texas Bowl. With the fighting Baylor Bears playing LS who? I don't know who they are. Some Bengal Tigers, whatever. Yeah. Anyway, so Wild Cigar, great place to go. You got some time for the holidays. Maybe you need to recover from the holidays. It's a great place to go and have a little quiet smoke and drink and watch the TV and a little peace and quiet maybe. Also, thank you to our friends over at Southern Gym. They're taking the week off. I think they open again Thursday. But they've been off since Christmas Eve, and they deserve it, because Robin, as most of y'all know, worked for Southern Gym, and she was exhausted, on Christmas Eve, because they had a lot of business, and it was a good Christmas for them, and that's great for the community, great for Gala, but it also shows that people understand and see quality when they go into Southern Gym. So they'll be back open again. If you got something as a gift that you either want resized or repaired or whatnot, then they're the people to talk to. Also, our friends over at Old Pro Roofing. We had a pretty good rainstorm around here the other day. I believe Sunday.
It was Saturday morning.
It was
wild.
Yeah, and so you better call John over at 817-734-2756, because you may have found out that your roof has a problem that you didn't even realize. Plus, I don't know how bad it was here, but I know in other parts, like where my parents were, down in, of course, Canada, they got hammered. And if y'all were in that same area that got hit pretty hard, you might need to have them come check your roof out, make sure there's no damage that has been done. So again, 817-734-2756. It's 2756. Let me say it right. And same thing with Jeff Kelly. If you're looking to move in and around this area, this is a good time to do it because the rates are going down. And if you want to know exactly what's happening to mortgage rates, you can talk to him at 817-781-0546, or you can email him, Jeff at jeffkellyrealty.com. I do have some friends over at Camco, Sammy Campbell and Candy Gal, that can help you with that as well. But call Jeff if you're thinking about moving into this area or moving out somewhere else in the area. He'll tell you that the market is still pretty strong here in Burleson. And I think it's just going to get even stronger. It's like once you build certain momentum, you're going to, as we add things, it's going to increase even more. It does increase traffic, I'll know that much. But that's something I'll be addressing with the mayor and Victoria next month. I have them both on during the course of the month. Also, thank you to our friends over at Hotworks. If you overindulged, it's a good time to go and maybe try to shed some of those pounds or whatnot. It's a good infrared workout because it doesn't hurt the joints and such as much as, like typical workouts do. This isn't CrossFit or something heavy. It's basically they have 11 different types of workouts. It's all with the infrared system. And they know what they're talking about. Michelle is an expert in this kind of physical therapy. And so call Hotworks. They're over by the Kroger and the movie theater and all that. I think it's called the Commons or something like that. I don't remember. Burleson Commons. But anyway, it's off of John Jones. Okay, you know where it's at. So there you go. Also, Local Life with Tiffany. Her new magazine should be out at the end of this week. I'm not sure what's going to be on it. She was, she took a couple of days off for Christmas, so I haven't been able to talk with her much in the last week or so. But anyway, Local Life will be out at the end of this week, and it goes to 30,000 homes. It'll be all over the neighborhood. It's a great place to do business. It's a great place to get your word out. A lot of eyeballs see it other than just the people who receive it. So it's a good place to advertise. So call her about rates, about timing, about size of ads, all the above. So there you go. And also Cody O'Brien of Burleson Buzz. I recommend this for local news. He's very diligent about such things. Now, what's interesting about this is that next week I'm going to start announcing a new venture for Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. And yes, I know. Taylor has been very diligent in working on the materials for it. And we'll talk more about it next Monday when I have Melissa Miller and Sarah Brown from the Chamber of Commerce. Sarah Roberts. I'm sorry. I called Sarah by her maiden name. That's just, I know, but that's just how I knew her from 30 years ago. But anyway, Sarah Roberts is her married name. And so, anyway, so the Burleson Buzz will keep you up to date on local stuff, what's going on in the city council, Centennial basketball, Burleson basketball, etc. Anything else going on? I don't think so. I don't think we have any nonprofit stuff. They're kind of taking a break as well. They're going to reopen pretty soon, so I bet their pantries are going to be kind of empty. So remember that. It's a good time to go and get some extra groceries because they probably got cleaned out for Christmas, and they've been off, and so they haven't been able to restock the shelves. So remember them next time you go to the store and add a little bit to the buggy there and take it by Harvest House, House of Hope, or Promises. All three be very grateful. Okay. Yesterday, as we all know, President Carter, died at age 100, which makes him the oldest president we've ever had. All right. Now, Carter became president right as my freshman year of high school. And I know this shouldn't surprise everybody, but I was already fairly interested in what current events, history, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that should be pretty obvious. Here, I'm going to try to share this with the folks here, which is always lots of fun. But anyway, Mr. Carter became the president right as I was going into high school. And as far as what I thought of him then, of course, now after 45 years or so, you're able to have a more of a perspective. And The thing about Mr. Carter that makes it hard to really assess him is because you're dealing with somebody that I believe to be a pretty good man, but I was not impressed as president. And as I've gotten to study him over the years and see him over the years, that assessment hasn't changed dramatically. I'm not here to criticize him personally because I think of all the presidents we've had, he has been a decent and genuine man in terms of faith and in terms of how he conducted himself. You know, did he have any scandals in his administration? Sure, but none that involved him directly or even indirectly. A lot of it had to do with just people that had worked for him and things of that nature. So as far as him personally, I think he was a great example. As far as his presidency, on the other hand, there was a great deal of turmoil and areas for criticism, I'll put it that way. Before we jump even further than that, I did latch on to a news clip about Mr. Carter. So here it is.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
He went from being Jimmy Who to winning the White House itself, then struggled with crises overseas and a troubled economy at home. A one-term president whose time as ex-president was the longest.
Thank you all.
Among the most active in American history, becoming the first American president to celebrate his 100th birthday. James Earl Carter Jr., he always went by Jimmy, was born in small-town Plains, Georgia, growing up on a farm without electricity or indoor plumbing. He attended the U.S. Naval Academy, studied nuclear physics, worked in the nuclear submarine program. Carter married Rosalind Smith, a friend of his sister's, and she became his lifelong partner. When his father died, Carter left his military career and went home to run the family peanut farm. But he wanted something more. He got into politics, Georgia state senator, then governor.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
In the Old South, Carter was something new.
The time for racial discrimination is over.
He attracted national attention.
Would our first challenger enter and sign in, please?
But was still enough of an unknown in 1973 to appear on What's My Line? 1 year later,
I'd like to announce that I am a candidate for president.
after Watergate, the country was ready for a Washington outsider who said America deserved a government as good as its people. A born-again Christian who promised voters, "I will never lie to you."
We now have a projected winner, James Earl Carter of the state of Georgia, elected the next president of the United States.
Carter narrowly defeated Gerald Ford, becoming the first president from the Deep South in more than a century.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
He started with a common touch, an inaugural walk to the White House, a cardigan sweater to talk to the nation about the energy crisis.
There's no way that I or anyone else in the government can solve our energy problems if you are not willing to help.
He became a champion of human rights.
No member of the United Nations can claim that mistreatment of its citizens is solely its own business.
And the Camp David Accord showed Carter at his best, idealistic, tenacious, leading marathon talks between Egypt's Anwar Sadat and Israel's Menachem Begin, achieving a peace treaty that is still in place today. But closer to home, Carter's inexperience and his distaste for political rough and tumble became serious handicaps. And when the economy tanked, so did Carter's popularity. He seemed to blame Americans themselves.
The erosion of our confidence in the future.
He looked weak, photographed collapsing during a run. And it got worse. In Iran, scores of Americans were taken hostage.
I'm a candidate for president of the United States.
Ted Kennedy announced he would challenge Carter for the nomination. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan, prompting Carter to boycott the Moscow Olympics. Above all, the hostage crisis consumed Carter's final year in office.
Any encouraging news from Iran, Mr. President?
No.
A mission to rescue the hostages ended in tragedy.
8 Americans had died, an unknown number of other Americans had been wounded.
It was my decision to attempt the rescue operation. The responsibility is fully my own.
Still hoping for a second term, Carter beat Kennedy, only to face an even more formidable opponent.
I'll bring new hope to America.
Ronald Reagan projected optimism and confidence, and he didn't think much of Carter.
There you go again.
Jimmy Carter lost in a landslide. And though he finally negotiated the release of the hostages, they weren't officially freed until just after he left office. Through it all, Carter was sustained by his faith.
You were faced with some huge crises as president. Did you drop down to your knees and pray?
Often, yes, often. In fact, I prayed more per day, per hour, while I was president than any other 4 years in my life.
And his defeat marked the beginning of a remarkable post-presidency. He established the Carter Center, committed to advancing human rights and democracy. He even got some respect from an old adversary.
You gave of yourself to this country, gracing the White House with your passion and intellect and commitment. For that, Mr. President, I thank you, and your country thanks you.
Carter built houses for the poor. He monitored elections, battled disease, and worked for peace around the world, sometimes at odds with his successors. He wrote dozens of books, and in 2002 was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. An extraordinary ex-president, proud of his years in the White House.
Kept the peace. We never went to war. We told the truth. Never lied to the American people. Never misled the American people. So in general terms, I feel perfectly at ease with my term.
Carter was diagnosed with cancer, determined to beat it while maintaining his typical collected demeanor.
I think I have been as blessed as any human being in the world. Everything's been a blessing for me. So I'm thankful and hopeful.
Despite the diagnosis, he continued building houses alongside Rosalind and marked their 75th wedding anniversary in 2021.
75 years, I can't predict.
Rosalind died 2 years later, marking the longest presidential marriage in history. In 2024, Carter marked another milestone, his 100th birthday, with an outpouring of gratitude for his life of service. He brought that devotion to everything he did for family and for country until the end. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news.
All right. A lot to unpack from that, but I thought there was a pretty balanced view for the most part. I'm going to address Mr. Carter in two ways, as president and as former president. As president, when I look at the positives of Mr. Carter, I will say that I do believe that he was an honest man. I do believe he was frank with the American people. In fact, he got criticized for that quite a bit. You know, that speech they referred to about the crisis of confidence, the famous, quote, malaise speech, which was a word that never came up. But basically what he was saying then in 1979, that the American people lost a lot of confidence. Well, he was trying to, make a point with the American people, but it was a political mistake because basically as president, you're supposed to project strength and optimism. And that kind of candor wasn't really helpful to him or the country. Not that the country needed to be lied to, but you probably should have phrased it in such a way that was more optimistic and uplifting than what he did, which I remember seeing the speech. I'm like, well, that's an unusual presidential speech. I mean, I was a junior in high school when it happened, and I remember watching it and think, is that the way all presidents talk? But there you go. As far as his presidency, though, some of the problems he couldn't resolve, some of the problems he made worse. The inflation problem got worse and worse, along with the unemployment problem. That's hence the name stagflation. And it got worse and worse primarily because the Congress and the president at that time, when they tried to solve one, they made the other worse. And so when inflation got out of hand, they would try to fix that, and then they would make unemployment worse. And so when they go try to deal with unemployment, inflation would get worse. Plus they had, the oil prices were out of this world compared to what we were used to paying. Now, I always tell the kids, gas prices when I was a senior in high school was like $1.70, $1.80 a gallon. And they're like, wow, that's great. That would be roughly about $6 a gallon now, when their minimum wage was like $2.50. in 1979 when we started working for other people. You're going to be working 45 minutes for 1 gallon of gas. That's how you can look at it. And so gas prices today, we look at it and it's $2.69 or whatever else. In relative terms, is a lot cheaper than what I paid for in high school. And some of that was not his fault. Some of it was. As far as the foreign issues, I remember Central America coming completely unhinged. Nicaragua and Guatemala and El Salvador, particularly Nicaragua, was taken over by socialists. They became client states of the Soviet Union, and that led to, in the Reagan years, a very aggressive policy against Nicaragua that resulted in some success, but also it resulted in the Iran-Contra affair, which is a long deal. I leave it to y'all to go look it up in history books. But as far as Central America and Africa, they were all seeming to lean towards the Soviet Union, which we know now, after getting all the data and all the information after they fell, that they were really just tottering on the brink. But at the time, he thought Russians were marching everywhere, and that they were always aggressive on the move. Then he had Afghanistan. On Christmas Day in 1979, they invaded Afghanistan. And in result, we boycotted the Olympics, which were going to be in Moscow that year. They thought that was a fairly ineffectual response, but there you go. But the crowning problem, if you will, the worst problem, without question in my mind, was the Iran hostage situation. What had happened was that Iran became an Islamic republic, and they overthrew the Shah of Iran, who was no saint. I mean, we shouldn't feel any pity for him. The Shah of Iran was a very aggressive, totalitarian tyrant who brutalized a lot of his own people. So let's not get all teary-eyed about the Shah of Iran. But when they overthrew him, they were looking for a place for him to land, and normally that would have been France, but they refused to take him. Carter took him primarily because the Shah also was having cancer issues, and so he thought we could treat him in Hawaii, as I guess where they put him. And the Iranians responded by raiding our embassy and taking numerous hostages. They let some go, but for a year, 52 of them were held hostage in Iran. And it just seemed like Mr. Carter could not do anything about it. And when they tried to do something about it in the summer of 1980, it was a disaster. The military attempt to go and try to get those hostages out just crashed and burned. And, several men were killed, a lot of men were injured. It was a disaster. And it probably is about as anything, close to anything else, is the reason why Mr. Carter started losing popularity. Now, I also remember in October of that year, even though Mr. Carter was not very popular, he still was leading in the polls, which tells you something about polling even then. And then the debate with Mr. Reagan about a week before the election sealed it, where Mr. Reagan basically comes across as optimistic and all happy, and also he asked the famous question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And no one could say they were. And Reagan wins in a landslide. It was my first election that I was able to vote in. Now, were there any positives out of the Carter administration? I think the biggest positive was the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt, which still exist. And for that, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat got Nobel Peace Prizes, but because of some technicality, Mr. Carter wasn't nominated in time, and he wasn't a third recipient, but he got one in 2002, which for accumulation of all these good works and whatnot. Now, as far as ex-president, a lot of the characteristics that Mr. Carter showed as president, he still had as ex-president. That is, Mr. Carter was committed to his own rightness of opinion and rightness of character. He was pretty rigid in dealing with other people and politically. He was very poor at the give and take of politics, and he looked at compromise not just as a retreat, but also as an offense to what he thought was right and the smart thing to do. He would take offense if he'd be confronted with the need or the suggestion of compromise. And he continued that into his ex-presidency, where he was very opinionated and pointed. His relationship with the ex-presidents, particularly the Democrat ones, was poor, especially Bill Clinton. He and Mr. Clinton did not get along because what Mr. Carter would do is he would basically parachute himself into a lot of these foreign events like elections in Central America or dealing with Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea at that time, or dealing with Gorbachev or dealing with, other foreign leaders as if he was still president and making pronouncements that the current president would have to walk back. And this one episode that's in the readings I got collected for today to read later talked about how Mr. Carter and Mr. Clinton had a shouting match while Mr. Clinton was president about some of the statements that he was making about some of these foreign affairs, where Carter would show up in Haiti, for example, and say, this is what the president needs to be doing. And it was putting pressure on Bill Clinton. And he also did that with Mr. Obama about dealing with several foreign events, particularly in the Middle East. So, Carter still made himself a presence. Now, as the video showed, he also did a lot of good things. Besides working for Habitat for Humanity, he also didn't spend his time getting on corporate boards and making tons of money. He wrote a lot of books, but he never monetized his presidency in any real way like Mr. Obama and Mr. Clinton have done to excess. I mean, Mr. Clinton's worth $250 million now, and Mr. Obama is worth about $100 million now. And Carter skipped all of that. He wasn't making $150,000 or $200,000 speeches. He wasn't promoting other products or services for money. He wasn't like Netflix and Obama have going on right now. He stayed true to the vision of what he was himself, and I'll give him credit for that. He was a pain in the rump, but he was a consistent pain in the rump to all these presidents. And sometimes I would get annoyed over the years with his pronouncements and his pontifications and his righteous ways. But that's who he was, and that's what he was all the way through. And, we could criticize Mr. Carter for, Iran-Contra, not Iran-Contra, I'm sorry, that's Mr. Reagan. We could criticize him for the Iran hostage situation. We could criticize him for the inflation. We could criticize him for the Russians, all the things I've already listed. But I guess the best way to put it is, could he have handled it better? That's hindsight. There were things he did as president that even I, as a kid, thought was, I'm not sure that's the best idea. And I was no savant when it came to political stuff then. But it just struck me, some of these things, I still to this day don't understand why he gave away the Panama Canal, but some people say it was a good idea. I haven't been convinced of that. But I will say that Mr. Carter was a decent man, maybe irritating, maybe a little self-righteous, but I do believe he was a man of faith, and I do believe that he lived that faith as he saw it, and that's not a bad eulogy to have. And I'd like to compare that to what we got going on now. Okay, and that would be still our current president, whether he knows it or not, Mr. Biden. Yeah, I know. I would almost joke about that if it weren't so sadly true. I was going to address today's show as the things I can do without. And one thing I can do without is the complete and total lie that has been perpetrated upon the American people over the last year by the media and by the Biden administration. You're going to see in the next 2 or 3 years exposés and books coming out saying that Joe Biden was even worse off than what he presented himself to the American public. And for that, we can blame the American media, and we could blame the Democrat Party, and we can blame himself and in his arrogance to try to force us to believe that he was capable of running for president and serving another 4 years. This weekend in the Washington Post, they came out with an article about, Mr. Biden's waning days in the White House, and he still believes he could have won, that he would have won against Mr. Trump, which is ridiculous. Had he run against Mr. Trump, it had been one of the biggest landslides ever. And I'm not saying this because Trump is such a political genius. Not at all. I'm just saying that Mr. Biden and the American people, well, let me rephrase this. The media and the Democrat Party and the Biden administration conspired, and that's the only word he can use, to keep from the American people this incredibly vital piece of information about the competency and the strength of the American president. There's no question that he was not fit to run for another 4 years, yet the Democrat Party refused to acknowledge that. And Joe and Jill Biden, and I include her with that too, Lady Macbeth, as you'll see in the future years when their books come out, they refused to acknowledge that Joe's declining capabilities. And anytime they would be shown on video, the media would say, "Oh, they're deep fakes," or they're selectively edited, things of that nature. You had that egregious Corinne Jean-Pierre, whom that is, if any other reason why I'm glad that Mr. Biden's not going to be president, that's right on the list, because she is the worst press secretary in my memory. She's a liar. All right. I know all press secretaries, smooth the rough edges and maybe shade the stories a little bit. She's just a liar, period. And I'm glad she's out of the scene. But Joe Biden was not fit to run for another 4 years. And they knew this last summer. Yet the American media, every time the stories would come up in other media, the mainstream media, if you will, would say, well, that's just Fox News. Or that's just, News Nation. Or that's just the National Review. Or whatever else. They would always discredit these stories. And you'd have Jean-Pierre and others say, oh, he's, quote, sharp as a tack. And one of the funniest episodes during one of her press conferences, he said, we could barely keep up with him. And one of the reporters said, well, maybe you need to go to the doctor, because there's no question. When people saw Joe Biden, they said, there is something wrong here. No, it's your perception that's wrong. No, you're just a right-wing bigot. No, you just don't like Mr. Biden and you don't like his policies, or blah, blah, friggin' blah. And so they basically conspired. And then that debate last June 27th was his idea, by the way. It wasn't Trump's idea. It was his idea to show how fit he was. And it was obvious to everybody that he had declined dramatically. And then all of a sudden, here comes the media saying, well, we always knew this. About 10 days ago, no, about a week ago, Wall Street Journal had an article about how the White House strictly enforced certain limitations upon Mr. Biden because of his physical decline. He only worked about 4 to 5 hours a day. No meetings after 4, no meetings before 10, no night events. If he had a night event he couldn't avoid, basically the afternoon was off. And I am quite convinced that in the last year in particular, that Joe Biden really was not in control of the White House. A very tight group of advisors and political insiders, I think, ran the White House and ran policy. And I really believe that, because his condition, you see it now, is worse and worse and worse. He's only made a couple of public statements since the election, and you just look at this, and all I can think is elder abuse. But I before we get too sympathetic, Joe Biden refused to consider the fact that he was declining. And the Democrat Party gathered around him because they thought he's the best bet to beat Trump. So they didn't have a primary worth talking about. They didn't have an open primary. And it took and then of course, after it became obvious to everybody, all of a sudden the Democrat Party got this idea in their head: we need to replace him with Kamala Harris. And it was too little too late for Ms. Harris. I mean, she had her own liabilities, but that was one of them. It's basically a 90-day campaign. And it's incredibly hypocritical for now the Democrat Party and the American media to say, well, we knew this all along. I told you so, and this kind of stuff. This has got to be one of the greatest cover-ups since Woodrow Wilson had a stroke in 1919 and his wife and doctor effectively ran the country. No one knew about it then, and it's just very similar now. Joe Biden, if the Democrat Party had really cared about the condition of Mr. Biden and the condition of this country, they would have asked him to step down a year and a half ago, or they would have asked him not to run again. But they didn't. And therefore, the lie of the year has to be the great cover-up of Mr. Biden's condition. And who's at fault, I've already listed, but I also want to leave this. Joe Biden is not a sympathetic character. He did this to himself. He was too arrogant to believe that he was losing capability of being coherent. He was too arrogant to believe that anybody else but him could beat Trump. And his arrogance and his stubbornness and his obstinance and the Democrat Party's willingness to accommodate that led to what happened in November. Now, when Mr. Trump was elected, I had mixed emotions about it, but I have fewer mixed emotions about it now. I really do. Not because Trump has improved so much in the last few weeks or whatever, but because now it's becoming more and more apparent just how bad Mr. Biden had declined, how badly, use English correctly, dummy, how badly he had declined and how dangerous that was and how we are lucky, we're just lucky that our adversaries overseas did not take advantage of that more fully. And so I guess you could pair that to Mr. Carter, to Mr. Biden. Mr. Carter had a healthy ego, to say the least. He always thought he was right. He always thought he was righteous. But I do believe that confronted with the same situation, Mr. Carter would have stepped aside. Carter was an ambitious politician. You can't run for president without a great deal of ego and ambition, and that's fine. I don't want some sad sack running for president thinking, oh, I'm no good. I don't need Eeyore as president. But as far as Mr. Carter, I do believe that he would have put the country first, and Mr. Biden did not. The Democrat Party did not. And you could be critical of Mr. Trump, and a lot of that criticism I may share. And you could be critical about, in some ways what the Republican Party has done. In some ways I may agree to. But I do think history is not going to be kind to the 2024 Democratic Party or Mr. Biden. Mr. Biden should have resigned, or at the very least not run again. And the Democrat Party and the New York Times and the Washington Post and most of your mainstream media conspired to keep this fiction alive that he was a capable person of beating Trump and running for another 4 years. And to hear them say now, well, we always knew that there was something wrong is grossly hypocritical. I feel better now. I've been wanting to say that for a while. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I'm not really blaming Democrats in my circle as well. They knew too. Almost all my Democrat friends knew about Joe Biden. It's a Democrat Party and the leadership of it that I have the most beef with. It's not the Democrat voters themselves. It's the Democrat Party. It's the Nancy Pelosi crowd, the DNC leadership, Jim Clyburn of the House and Chuck Schumer of the Senate, and that whole crowd that all circle the wagons to keep prop him up like some Weekend at Bernie's kind of thing. You ever seen that movie?
Maybe.
It's a long story, but Weekend at Bernie's, a couple of guys are trying to pretend this guy who was they needed for some sort of business deal, was still alive, and so they, basically kept his corpse, and they'd move his body and they had sunglasses on him, and so the Weekend at Bernie's, it's a cheesy movie from the 80s.
Cheesy movie from the 80s.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, I would like to end this on a more pleasant note. I'd like to end it with Mr. Carter. I had criticisms of Mr. Carter then, and I do now. But I do believe he was a decent man. I do believe he thought maybe even a little bit too closely, a little bit too obstinately, that he was doing the right thing for the American people. I never got the idea while he was president that he was doing things strictly for political advantage. I really do think that he thought he was doing the best he could for the American people. And I have respect for a lot of his post-presidential activities because, like I said earlier, he didn't monetize it. He didn't make millions and millions of dollars. His books, I don't know how much money he made off his books, but he could have made a lot more, and he could have used his position to enrich himself, and he did not. And he returned to his roots, lived in Georgia the rest of his life, and taught Sunday school that anybody could attend. So, I think we need to kind of, have a balanced view of Mr. Carter. We don't have to appreciate what happened in his presidency, but I think we should give him some credit for being a decent gentleman. And that's pretty much all I got to say about that. It's almost in a way it was kind of sad when he died yesterday for me because it was it reminded me of my high school years.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I remember, like I said, I wasn't some savant. I didn't sit around, but I did have a group of friends that, I think the kids in my era, I guess because all the crap that was going on, was a little bit more aware of what was going on in the world. Because we had just finished Vietnam. Vietnam officially ended when I was 13. And, we had Watergate and we had all this junk going on. And then we had the plague of disco. And, God, disco is a disgrace.
What's your favorite?
There's like 5 disco songs that didn't want to make me rich, but the rest, hand me the barf bag. But anyway.
The barf bag.
The barf bag. But as far as... It was just kind of melancholy in a way because it reminded me of those times, and they were hard, and a lot of us young men had to sign up for the draft, even though we didn't have one. But we were probably as close to having a startup of the military events that I could remember. But anyway, so there you go. Monday I have, like I mentioned, Chamber of Commerce will be in. Thursday, I have Alex Phillips, who is going to update us on what's going on around the world. I got a couple of announcements I'm going to make next week about the expansion of Mr. Allard's Neighborhood into other media, shall we say.
What?
And the opportunities that await all of you out there.
Okay, fine. I'm spilling the beans. You're on CNN now.
Oh, dadgummit. I was going to make... CNN, are you kidding? My dad would disown me. The Commie News Network, as he calls it.
Sir.
Oh, yeah, my dad has a lot of good names for a lot of those networks.
Oh,
yeah. The NBC, Nothing But Clinton. That's what he called it at the time. Or ABC, All Bill Clinton. All right. Don't even get me into that hot mess that's MSNBC. But anyway... y'all have a good new year. Tomorrow, be careful on the roads because there's going to be some hoodlums out there. Order yourself a pizza from Gina's and stay in and watch the football games. And we'll see y'all next Monday.